Hi, Misha here, and while doing kind of a recent inventory count and going over everything, came across this pistol, which has been here since 2016. I went back and looked, and I realized I never really talked about it in a video. So, heck, why not? I know kind of obscure 7.65 32 caliber guns aren't everyone's cup of tea, but this actually saw service in both World War I and World War II. Plus, has an interesting connection to the Pope, and is mechanically quite interesting. So, today, let's talk about the German Dreyse, or Dreyse, model 1907. First produced by Rheinmetall or RMF, but soon rebranded to Rheinmetall, probably a company you've heard of. So why the Dreyse name? Well, R&M purchased the Dreyse company in 1901. The Dreyse company had good success in the mid-19th century with the needle gun, but when Paul Mauser came along, his designs pretty much supplanted it, meaning by, the 1880s and 1890s, they were on hard times and hadn't had any good new products. So R&M purchased the company and used its assets and used its Dreyse name for its new line of machine guns and pistols. R&M had previously more or less focused on larger things like artillery pieces, mortars, and the like. Now, this gun, so it has no direct connection to Nicole Dreyse, it's often credited to Louis Schmeisser. So we'll do that, although this is not 100% verified by history. We do know that development was underway by 1905, went through 1906, finalized in 1907, and that's when the company started kind of advertising it. But it would not actually get released until 1908. In fact, the patent wasn't granted until February of that year. But it did pretty much immediately gain some attention because there weren't many guns like this at the time. Self-loading, automatic, blowback, 32 caliber, 7.65 millimeter. This was directly inspired by John Browning's Model 1900, which was making quite the splash in both the USA, but especially in Europe, and especially with European police. American police were pretty content with revolvers because they were operating not only in urban areas, but also kind of suburban and rural. But European police operating mostly in urban areas, close range, felt that guns of this nature were just, better suited to them. So actually the first customer of this gun, 700 were sent to the Saxony Police Department, who would receive them. And these would be early versions. At the beginning, R&M was going to do two versions, the police version and a commercial version, with the commercial being a little more ornate and the police being a little more duty-oriented. And these were the police version, and about the only ones ever made, because pretty soon they dropped the whole idea of having two separate production lines for this gun. Instead, they were just going to make the model 1907. And there was another early change around serial number 9000. They added a lanyard loop. They also added a disconnector. Originally, it did not have one, disconnector/sear. Otherwise, it would stay more or less the same until about serial number 215 to 216,000, when the marking would change from the RMF to Rheinmetall on the side. And then production would last until about serial number 254,000, making this one relatively late production. And there were many other small changes besides, including with the top and the sights, the slide serrations, and even the front here for disassembly. But that's kind of the major evolutions and iterations. So, what is this, and how is it different from its contemporaries, like the Walther and the Mauser I grabbed here? First off, as the name would indicate, 1907, this is an older gun, older design. Mauser here, this is the 1914, did not come out with a .32 caliber pistol until, well, 1914. They did have the 1910 and 25 6.35 millimeter. Walther did not release their Model 1 until 1910, give or take, and the Model 4 here was not released until 1915, give or take, and it's in 7.65. This is the militarized version of the Model 3. This is a heavier gun. Picking it up, you can feel it. It's about 25 ounces, whereas the Mauser here is about 20 to 21 ounces, and our Walther is downright lightweight at about 18 ounces. Size-wise, they're pretty comparable. These two are right around 6 inches, give or take, whereas the Dreyse is slightly longer at about 6.25 to 6.3 inches. Barrel length, this is about 3.6 inches, with these two being closer to 3.5. Magazine capacity, this is 7 rounds. These two are 8 rounds. So, yeah, it's just an older, different type of gun. But these are later designs. That did not fall out of the pistol, I promise. It fell from above. But this came first and actually was pretty darn successful. So let's talk about what we have here and how it functions. You'll note that there are not slide serrations in the back, and the ejection port is pretty far back. And this has slide serrations in the front, like a lot of modern pistols. Well, that's because of how it charges. When you cock it back, there's kind of a bridge here that this goes through. There's a breech block that sticks out the back. There's no hold open of any type, and unique cocking mechanism. Also pretty unique for that day and time, we have a loaded chamber indicator. Or rather, I should say a cocked indicator, because it will protrude. It's basically the tail of your striker, but a neat feature. You'll notice here's the latch. You can't push it when this is cocked. When you pull the trigger, you can slide it all the way and open the gun up. Pretty different system here. We have a lower frame with the trigger group, or the sear and disconnector, I should say. And then we have everything in the top here in a self-contained unit. Pretty unique for a pistol. In a lot of ways, this is inspired by the Browning. It has a pretty similar safety, 180-degree rotation. Has a magazine release on the bottom. This is actually very stiff on this gun. Actually, all of them I've ever had are pretty stiff. Little 7-round mag. The mag actually has a little dimple or nipple on the floor plate because you use this to remove the bushing for full disassembly. It is the furthest thing from drop free, though. You have to kind of cram it in there. And the catch actually, let me take it out again, show you. That catch actually locks using this cutout 2/3 of the way down the spine. But it does have holes to let you know how many rounds are loaded. The grips are actually quite interesting. They're kind of made of a bone material. although different ones can change that. We have fixed sights. And again, there are some variations in the sights. These are set for 25 meters, giving you an idea of what this is meant for. And the manufacturer gives it a maximum range of about 50 meters. It is, well, a gun of its time. It is very solid feeling. It's not too hard to cock. It's got a stout spring in it. I'll give it that. And the trigger is a good service trigger. It's smooth enough, but it's not light. It does have a pretty wide, curvy shoe to it there. Unlike the 1900 Browning, which has the recoil spring separate from the barrel above, even though the barrel is kind of mounted low with a high bore axis here for the sights, the recoil spring is fitted around the barrel in a more modern style. Yeah. Interesting pistol. And it did see a good bit of service, and they produced quite a few, considering these were in production between 1908 and 1918, although primary principal manufacturing was kind of changing for World War I in 1915. Again, our later Walther Model 4 and our Mauser 1914. These are clearly more advanced designs. The Mauser has a last round hold open. The Walther is just lighter, slimmer. But that's not to say that Dreyse was a bad gun. The 1907 was actually pretty successful, all things considered. In addition to the Saxony police, the Berlin police would purchase several of these and issue them. In 1912, one of the most famous users would purchase about 30. That would be the Swiss Guards, the Pope's Swiss Guards. These would be issued to officers and non-coms, actually for a very long time. They were not officially retired and replaced until 1990, replaced by the SIG P225. That's actually pretty amazing to me that they stayed in service for almost 80 years. But anyway, we move into World War I, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Habsburgs, purchased pretty good quantities of these because they were what were available, and they were perfectly good enough guns. Rheinmetall is a competent manufacturer. And while, of course, the Luger and the broom-handle Mauser and the Walther and Mauser pistol were all used by the Imperial German military, several Dreises were purchased and issued or private purchased and carried by officers. These would have been standard guns, although they did have an additional proof marking on this side here to show that they had been tested and were approved for military use. So, still had this commercial crown end mark, but then an additional imperial proof mark on top of that. Interestingly, even though production ended in 1918, in 1919, Lithuania would purchase just over 100 pistols from Germany. And between 1920 and 1922, the new nation of Czechoslovakia would purchase a few thousand pistols. But more interesting than that, they were already being pulled from service in 1923. And the reason given was accidents. No one knows for sure, but some speculate maybe they were having trouble with the takedown catch getting worn or accidentally knocked, coming open. If it is cocked, it should not open. However, if this part malfunctions and it does open, that would let the striker go forward I can do it here, yeah. And could let the gun discharge down. So we would require mechanical malfunction. It also should be pointed out that Czechoslovakia was starting to make its own pistol designs around this time. First the VZ-24, then the VZ-27. So I think a lot of it had to do with that. And ironically, those were actually based on a successor Mauser design. But that's a story for another day. So not much Czech service for these. Finland would also require a few because they pretty much took any .32 caliber they could get. They were also another young nation. And you don't hear much about the 1907 in the 1930s. Production was over and that was that. But still, they produced well over 100,000 and they were in Germany. In World War II, Germany would again reissue these, at first to police officers and second-line troops and occupation troops. That way, P-38s and Lugers could go to front-line troops. But by 1943, 44, and of course 45, towards the end of the war, these were issued to the Volkssturm and the Volksgrenadier and other troops because it was an available gun. You see lots of weird things being issued. And yeah, so they did see some use in World War II as well. And several dozen, if not 100, also made it into the hands of the Norwegian resistance, the Norwegian underground, as well as a few kind of getting scattered about the underground throughout Europe. After all, this is a relatively small gun, if not light, and it is firing a standard caliber, standard cartridge. So, yeah, I will say that it does seem like these guns held up pretty well, because at this point, parts had not been in production for over 20 years, and yet guns were still available. Plus, there are those Swiss Guard versions that they kept running throughout the 1980s even. So it seems like the parts were pretty damn well constructed, all things considered. That said, I have little desire to shoot this gun. I'm sure it's safe, I'm sure it's fine. I'm also sure it handles like an early .32 caliber, and I just don't feel the need. So, no shooting footage probably ever for this, just because. I'm sure it's on the internet if you want to see it working, though. These are inexpensive, especially considering the majority in the USA are bringbacks. In fact, this was a pretty popular bringback trophy for U.S. Servicemen because they were available. A lot of Germans handed these in when they surrendered. They were small, again firing a standard cartridge, and they were uniquely European and uniquely weird, which even back in the 1940s, servicemen recognized as, hey, that's a neat thing to bring home to show the wife and kids. But, and of course, every one of them, I'm sure, told their kids that they took it off a dead Nazi that they shot. You know, that's just how that went. When in reality, they probably were handed it by a surrendering soldier or police officer, or even more likely, they probably traded it for a pack of smokes or won it in a card game. Anyway, my point is the majority of these 1907s in America are legitimate bringbacks, so they will not have import marks, and they will not have been refurbished. Now, some of them might be refinished or reblued here in the 1950s because there was kind of a craze of doing that, but at least they made it out of Germany more or less unmolested. So while this one's not in 100% condition, far from it, it's honest wear, in my opinion. Now, Wikipedia states that there were never any official import contracts of these. I'm not going to say that because Century Arms brought in a lot of weird stuff, as did Interarms before them, including a lot from Finland, so it's possible the Finnish ones came in. But I think it's safe to say there were never any large numbers imported. If any came in, it was probably small, tiny batches. But it's often a forgotten little piece of World War I and World War II history. And it is a mechanically very weird gun. And of course it was made at a time when this is all milled, machined steel. No stampings, no castings here. And even the grips are real. So it does feel chunky. Again, perhaps this latch is the weakest point of the design, but it's perfectly tight on this one. So, like a lot of small military police guns, it was probably carried a decent amount, but fired comparatively little. Plus, it's just a simple blowback 32. Not exactly a lot of stress on this type of durable frame. But like I said, it's been around for a few years, and I've been planning to do a video on it. So here you go. That's probably not everyone's cup of tea, but for those that endured it with me, I greatly appreciate it. And if you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. And if you'd like to help support the channel as we move into 2022, please check out the link to the Patreon page. This is Misha. Catch you very soon. Next time.